All right, we'll start that again. I kind of thought I was on a roll though. All right.
No, it was really good.
Okay. Start this over. Take two.
Take two.
All right. Welcome everybody. My name is Patrick Morris with Next Level Pets. I am here today with Rachel Bernhardt of Flameless Creation Services out of Anchorage, Alaska. I've had the pleasure of knowing and working with Rachel for some time now, and Flameless Creation Services is the premier and only, if I'm correct, only aquamation service provider in Anchorage. The reason for this interview today is because Next Level Pets is involved with pet loss grief and helping people heal from the pain of saying goodbye. Rachel's involved in a much different but equally important part of the process, and that's aquamation, and that's what you actually do with your pet after you say goodbye. And I've been embarrassed when I've talked about aquamation and people have asked me what that is, and not being able to answer the question with any strength in the answer, any knowledge. So I'm really grateful for Rachel to be here to answer the questions that I've come up with to hopefully just educate people on everything involved with this really new and exciting way to honor your pet after they say goodbye. So that being said, Rachel, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
I know we've been planning this for a while, so I'm glad that we actually found time in our schedules to sit down and do this. So okay, so well, we'll do some background stuff towards the end. Right in the beginning, I kind of want to just get in the nuts and bolts, and then please feel free to expound on the questions, and stop me if I'm running through them too quickly or anything like that. Or yeah. So my first question is just what is aquamation? If you can tell us just a little bit about the process, the technology, and just that the I guess the manufacturer's guide, so to speak, of what exactly is aquamation.
You got it. Yeah. So aquamation or water cremation is a form of cremation. It's a lot easier, I think, to discuss in like a comparison contrast to flame cremation, which most people are familiar with. So in the beginning, you have a body, and in the end, you have ashes. And I think that's something that people are familiar with. But what happens in the middle is a little different. So instead of using heat and flame, we use water and some chemicals. It's a big stainless steel machine that fills with warm water, and we add some chemicals to tilt the pH of that water into the alkaline or basic part of the pH scale. And then the water circulates gently for about 18 hours in our case. And then once that water is drained out of the machine into a holding tank, we're left with the bony remains that are then processed into ashes that can be returned to the family. So it's the benefits of it. It's a more environmentally friendly process. It doesn't take quite as much energy to operate this equipment as it does a flame crematory. And when you are doing flame cremation, you inherently have carbon ash that's being expelled into the atmosphere, and you do not have that with water cremation. So those are the two environmental benefits. It's a little gentler of a process. So we actually end up with more bony remains after we end up with more ashes that we're able to return to the family, which I think is nice.
Yeah.
And it's less, I would say, like, less destructive. We've tried in the past to, let's put some rose petals in here. This is really beautiful, really nice. It doesn't break down plant material even very well. It's very specific to attacking the bonds between our cells in human and animal tissue. Really specific. So
Wow. Okay. So, all right.
that was a lot.
No, I was worried about this. I was worried that after each question, 5 new ones would
we'd
pop
have 5
up.
more. Yeah.
Yeah. But no, that's so I guess especially with concerns that everybody has about, anything that's going to be beneficial to the environment. One question is when you say chemicals, but then
Mhm.
also environmentally friendly, can you talk a little bit about, because I think of chemical and then I automatically think that's going to be not good for,
Bad. Okay. Yeah. So the chemicals that we use here, we use potassium hydroxide. And
okay?
so that's the same chemical that's used. It's used in like soaps. It's in
Yeah,
a
it's
lot
lye,
of,
right?
yeah, it's lye. So it's in a lot of
NaOH.
the same, yeah, you have it probably under your kitchen sink
Yeah,
in
yeah,
one form or another. Um, and by the time it comes out, the water that we collect in the tank is not like a hazardous waste that we have to dispose of. It doesn't, in our case, we don't put it down the drain into the municipal waste system. We're able to alter that pH back to a more neutral,
okay,
like into like a 7 or an 8 usually is where we
good.
end up at. And then we're able to land apply it. So we're returning that water to the environment. We're using it to water plants, water grass, water trees here in the community.
So the actual process itself is recyclable in a sense.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
There's no actual waste as a byproduct, I guess. Yeah.
That's fascinating. Okay. And then also I know question I was asked earlier this morning by a friend of mine. They said, well, but I would want my ashes back.
Mhm.
So you said that the end result of the process does net out a whatever is it, I mean, could you actually have, is it the actual bones or
So in this, you get ashes back, and when I say ashes, that's kind of the colloquial term that we as a
sure.
society have agreed to. You know, whatever is in that urn
Mhm.
is called ashes. It makes more sense intuitively when we're talking about flame cremation, but at the end of a flame cremation, just like at the end of a water cremation, you have bone fragments.
Okay.
Um, and we, in both facilities, you'll find what's called a cremulator. It's a giant
Okay.
machine that has one very specific job of pulverizing bone fragments into a uniform, into what we know as ashes. So it resembles sand almost. Same. It's the same.
So
Same.
so in essence, then the net result is the same.
Mhm.
Um, but there's far more environmental benefit, not only in waste product that's produced during the process, but also what's left over at the end of it.
I would say so. I mean, in flame cremation, there's not really any waste
Okay.
either, technically, because it's all everything is incinerated. The
Yeah.
waste that you have would be in the form of, pollution, like carbon pollution into the
Right.
atmosphere.
And
Yeah,
added energy usage during the process.
correct.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Um, how long has, I mean, I think I might have briefly heard, the term or concept of aquamation within the last 5 or 10 years.
Yeah.
Again, this may just be me pretending that I have, but um, how long has, do you know how long has the tech been around? And
A long time. So aquamation as a term is it's a branded term, just like Kleenex is facial tissue. Aquamation is very specific to a specific manufacturer of water
okay,
cremation equipment. So
interesting.
the process is scientifically, it's alkaline hydrolysis is the scientific process that's happening
Okay.
inside of that chamber. And that process has been identified and been around for over 100 years,
Oh,
I want
wow.
to say.
Okay. But so the process has been around for a long time.
The process has been around for a really long time. Yeah, it was originally developed by a gentleman who was looking for a way to manufacture fertilizer, actually.
Okay.
So it's a hydrolyzed protein fertilizer that he was looking to manufacture. And so the technology kind of dipped out of favor, and it wasn't really used formally in any kind of funerary or like as
Sure.
a crematory process until about the 80s or 90s it came back.
Okay. Yeah,
And
that's
but
right.
really in the past, yeah, 15, 20 years for sure, this has been increasingly being adopted as a alternative to flame cremation.
And as a side note, pardon me, I remember watching a TEDx talk about how anything involving um, pet, death care, is an up and coming, segment, economically. So cremation services, one gentleman who made, like headstones specifically for animals. So it's kind of exciting to see that technology, and, an environmental, focus and benefit is also, made its way into the market. And as you are a pioneer of this, in our great state above us. Uh,
Yes. No, I think people are really, I mean, we're recognizing that our animals are family members, you know. I think there's maybe more than we'd like to admit. Like we're having birthday parties for our dogs. Like we're
yeah.
taking time off to care for them after they have a surgical procedure. Like they are family members. And so it only makes sense for kind of the funeral industry to expand to include services for animals.
Well,
And
and
often,
on that,
yeah.
as it relates to my side of things, especially when someone's going through the grief process, if there's, anything that happens after a farewell has been made, if there's anything that can help that grieving pet parent feel better about anything that happens afterwards. And what I mean by that is then at least knowing that the physical remain of their pet is being taken care of in a way that is respectful of the planet. It's just a nice way to know that after they're saying goodbye, that there's still some, compassion and attention to doing things in a way that doesn't cause any harm to anything,
I'm really glad that you brought that up because I think that's a piece of this puzzle that is still lagging a little bit. I think when you lift the curtain and go behind the scenes in a funeral home for people, you typically see a very well regimented,
Yeah.
infused with compassion kind of process that's happening. And everything is about dignity and preserving respect, even though that person is deceased. And I think that we don't see that same kind of care being instilled into just the processes that are in place for handling the physical remains of a deceased animal.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
think when you lift the veil, a lot of times that's not a super pretty process. And I think we can do better. So here I am.
Well, no, I mean, you hit on that, I know you've had extensive, background and history in helping people with different phases of, loss when it comes to humans.
Mhm.
And yeah, in losing my own mom, I, kind of had some experience of that, when the remains leave wherever, their last, moment was, yeah, it can be kind of shocking if someone's not prepared for, what happens. And in reference to, the mobile, euthanasia providers that I work with, a lot of them will handle that for the families. They'll be the ones taking, the animal, with them after they have passed. And just anything that's going to let that grieving person have some form of just additional comfort that, yeah, there is dignity. I love that you chose that word, involved with what happens next, it
Mhm.
just, I think that can be incredibly valuable and meaningful to people. So, thank you for touching on that. Um, now, can you, walk us through, I guess, the process or the, perspective from your clients? So, um, if they have, um, you know, whenever the pet's, body reaches you,
Mhm.
what then happens from, the side of the pet parent?
Sure. So it's a little different, I think, for every family. And that's something that I'm really happy that I'm able to provide for my families. I feel like I'm not in a position where I need to force people to fit into some internal process I have here. Certainly, we have processes that are not to be tampered with to include, like identification. Like an
Yeah.
ID tag goes with everybody, period, no exceptions. Things like that, we have no exceptions for. But whether I'm picking up the body from the family's home, from a veterinary clinic, whether that family wants to bring that animal to me, whether they want to be present to do paw prints together, whether they want to witness the body being placed into the cremation equipment. All of those are
Okay, wow.
whatever the family wants to be a part of. I'm there for that.
So you really just open your doors to the entire process if they want to be present for that.
Absolutely, yeah.
Wow, okay.
Yeah. So I feel if that's important to somebody, for them to, I, I guess that's kind of where this started for me, was having a professional background, being very hands-on in death care,
Yeah,
and feeling a sense of honor in having that responsibility of walking somebody's deceased loved one through kind of all of these death care steps after the fact, after you've said that goodbye. That was really important to me. So when I started to interact with the funeral industry, after losing a grandmother, and
mhm,
then after my dog died, and being kind of asked to step back from that process, I felt really dissatisfied with that. And I don't see that there's any reason for anything behind closed doors to be behind closed doors. If you want to be here for that, if that's important to you, if you find value in that, in being hands-on and walking through all of those final steps, then I don't see why any reason why I shouldn't allow families to do that. Yeah.
yeah. Well, thank you for saying that. I mean, that's and a side note, that's I think one of the things that I've respected the most about you and getting to know you
Mhm.
is, your bravery and just no, I mean, I mean that with all sincerity.
Yeah.
I too, my journey in pet loss grief came from the exact same situation. It was reactionary to what I found lacking in how pet loss was treated, and specifically when I lost my cat and my mom at the same time, as and then just seeing how differently those losses were dealt with, professionally and otherwise, and that started my journey on saying there's got to be a better way. But in that journey, I just want to help people heal. I'm on that side, and I have such respect and admiration for you and everything that we've talked about. Like when use the word death care. At first, remember we talked, and I was like, it's such an abrupt thing, but it's such a real thing, and it shouldn't be something that someone shrinks away from. There should be dignity. There should be compassion in every step of the way. I mean, it's going to be a reality for everybody. Um,
Mhm.
and there's better ways that we can face that. So yeah, that's always one of the things that I've just respected in you personally and professionally so much is your commitment to not running from that and really saying no, this is so that's awesome that you offer that transparency, you know for dignity and whatever somebody is capable of, in that process. That's massive. And I have such respect for you and for the mobile vets that I work with, because I just um I think I wouldn't have the capacity to be there on the front lines. I'm kind of there for what happens next, but so kudos to you guys. Seriously, are champions and heroes in my book. So okay, moving on. So when someone brings a body to Flameless Creation Services, what's the average turnaround time?
Sure. So I usually tell people to expect about 4 or 5 days.
Okay.
This is a longer process than flame cremation. Like I said, I mentioned previously, the actual water cremation itself takes about 18 hours. And
Okay.
then once that machine drains, the bone fragments that are left are saturated with water. So they need to dry for a period of time. And we air dry everything here. So it just takes a couple of days for that to happen.
Now, how long is that? I mean, do people in your experience, with flame-based creation or otherwise, are people wanting a faster turnaround time, or does it really not
I think that I haven't had anybody um, be necessarily upset with that. I think that's kind of a pretty standard turnaround time, even with the flame crematories, especially locally, just because of the volume
Yeah.
of animals that they're handling. That's just kind of
Not, yeah.
about a week, I think, is pretty standard.
Yeah, and I would imagine that people wouldn't be ready to receive ashes or even really start planning on that step. Yeah, okay, so that makes sense. Okay, let me see. What are now this is kind of a more obscure, not obscure question, but and we might have already touched on it, but what are the, I guess, macro benefits that you see maybe, and this may reiterate what we've already talked about, but in the industry and I guess death care in general, what are the macro benefits? I mean, I guess we've discussed environmentally.
Mhm.
Is the process a little more expensive because it's
Mhm.
more of a newer tech? But are there general overarching benefits in the macro sense? I hate to be repeating myself, but
No, it's fine. I think I understand what you're asking. So as far as price point, we are a little more expensive than the other crematories in our area specifically. A lot of that is derived from it is a longer process, so it takes more manpower to kind of walk remains through every step of the process here. But the other part of that is we're not just kind of an assembly line, for lack of
yeah,
a
I was
better
gonna,
term, for cremating animals. This is um, operating more in line with what a funeral home would offer
yeah,
for
yeah,
families than it is for a pet crematory. So each of these families gets a ton of, I mean, as much individualized attention as they want. I will drive to your house to pick up your animal. I'm going to deliver these ashes to your door. There's a lot more manpower kind of involved for each
yeah. No,
family.
I'm glad you mentioned that. Yeah, it's every time we've talked, you've always expressed, you know, for lack of a better word, the grace with which you approach each family and their individual, deceased family member. So okay, that would make sense that if it's more hands-on, more personal, more catered to that actual individual versus, just an assembly line.
Mhm.
Um, Now, would you say that that's kind of standard for all water-based cremation services, or is that something
I
signature to Flameless Creation?
I think that in the pet aftercare world, I think what we're doing is different, especially in Alaska. Um, I can't speak for I can't speak for Alaska kind of operates in its own little bubble.
Yeah.
Um, so and what we're doing here, the business model of it is different. And the fact that we also have happen to be operating water cremation equipment is also unique. Um,
Yeah, and I'm sure anything new to an industry is going to shake things up, and people need to find out, what is it, why is it beneficial? Hence, the reason for that I really wanted to do this interview with you
mhm,
is to help people really get a better sense of what is involved, why it's such a great alternative to the traditional method, and obviously highlight exactly everything you're doing personally in this regard. So, okay. Are there any misconceptions that you think people hold about aquamation? Like any, or
yeah.
and what are there any uh, um, misunderstandings that you would like to dispel? Or
Definitely. Definitely. Okay. I think the
I
two
think we hit
most,
a bit. I think we hit a
yes,
big theme here.
let's
Yes.
do it. Okay.
Okay.
So I think the two things that I get most often is so what you're just gonna like be dumping grandma down the drain is the first one that I get. That
Wow.
um that somehow all of your loved ones' mortal remains are going to like go down the drain and be processed into the municipal
Okay.
wastewater system, and then somebody else is going to be drinking that water.
Wow. Okay. I never even
And
thought
that's
about
the
that.
yeah,
That
so
could.
that's the like first kind of cringe thing that I hear from people. And then
Okay.
the other one is that they have it kind of likened in their minds to being like dissolved in a vat of acid,
Yeah.
like you might see in like a CSI show or some.
That's why I had to
Yeah.
ask the question about chemical, because I
Yes.
think it creates a false idea of what's going on. Yeah.
It's a surprisingly gentle and surprisingly clean process. The first time I fired up that machine, I was really surprised by how quiet it is.
Wow.
It's like if anybody has a fish, I know we were talking about fish tanks before we started recording. Like if anybody has a fish tank at home, the little pump that circulates the water in your fish tank, it's a lot more like that than it is to anything else that I could think of.
Well, that's an interesting element too. I mean, I don't know how you would necessarily inform people of that, but yeah, I would much rather have an idea of something, a soothing process going on with my pet than maybe what I may imagine with big flames. Um, but yeah, I guess that comes
Yes.
to the individual.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, also something that I found very interesting too is in one of our previous conversations, you said that if somebody were so inclined, and I know some people may, you know, have a different opinion on this, but I was very fascinated that the water could be used for planting.
Mhm.
Because as you know, I do a lot with, um, and I really have a lot of. It's very important for me to help people find beautiful ways to celebrate the legacy of their pet and to honor the time that they were allowed with them to be a beacon of inspiration, of love, of and not just focusing on whatever the final moments may have been if they were difficult, because we have such a horrible amnesia when it comes to our pets. And these last few moments, the things that you and I deal with professionally, can be so jarring. So I just loved finding out that not only in your process do you get the actual remains or the ashes, but if someone was inclined and they had a place to plant, like I mean, one of the things that I always try to suggest is someone plants a tree or
Mhm.
herbs or something that's regenerative, and they can use as reflection of their pet and keep that spirit with them, and that they could actually use some of the water you said to nourish that tree that they may have planted, or their flowers if they have a garden. Or can you talk about that just for a second?
Yeah, we can certainly arrange to make that happen. We have had the water tested on a couple of different occasions to assess the kind of nutrient content. Because we went into it, we were thinking that, oh, if this process was developed to manufacture fertilizer
Sure.
100 years ago, then maybe this is some really nutrient-rich water that we're
Yeah.
working with here. It's not. It's
Okay.
mostly water. So it
Okay.
does have the kind of basic components of what you might find in a fertilizer, something that you would
Okay.
want to like nourish plants with. It's mostly water. So
Okay.
yeah, you're more than welcome to take water home to water, but
Okay.
that's really about all it is. And it's a lot of water. So every time we fire up that machine, it's about 300 gallons of water.
Okay. Wow.
So, and that's a lot of water. It's a lot of water.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, any other kind of just general misunderstandings people may have? I mean, that's interesting. The uh, yeah, it's not a bowling, not a witch's brew.
Nope,
Uh,
not boiling, not a pressure cooker, not boiling water. There are other models of crematory equipment that do operate under pressure and that do use hotter water. Ours
yeah.
operates at atmospheric pressure, so there's no pressure about it. And it doesn't ever get hotter than 200 degrees. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, also too, I'm sure it's probably there's some degree of difficulty. I'm familiar with using NaOH in other kind of chemical processes. And people hear the word like lye and they're like, oh, it's caustic. And it's like, well, yeah, but when you're dealing with, pH levels and stuff, there's things that someone can do, but that's getting into chemistry class, which I wasn't, good at. But yeah, it's all things that aren't you're not building bombs or anything like that. No,
No, absolutely not. No. And again, the volume of water that we're using too, by the time the water comes out, yeah,
it's good.
we're
Okay.
returning it back to the earth.
Okay.
Yeah.
which is important. All right. Now, okay, what is my, okay, and I think, I guess the final question I have is, um, if you don't mind, can you talk a little bit about, you know, just briefly your background, which I find so fascinating, and what led you to want to get involved in this in the first place?
Absolutely, yeah. So for the past, I'm going to age myself, over 10 years, I've been working with a nonprofit in Anchorage that facilitates organ and tissue donation. So it was my job to kind of walk families through that process of arranging for the organs and tissues of their deceased person to be donated for transplantation. And then kind of over the years, I got more and more involved behind the scenes in the operating room, started interfacing with a lot of the funeral homes in a professional capacity on a first name basis with most of the funeral homes here. I'm really happy to be a lifelong Alaskan. I'm born and raised in Anchorage, so there's a really wonderful community feel here. But just as I began to interact, like I said, as a consumer with some of these industries, and then having had the experience of working with bodies, and then not being able to do that with my grandmother, not being able to wash her body and dress her, I felt like I was missing something.
Yeah.
Um, and then when my dog died, having to go through that process of probably waiting too long to realize that quality of life had become an issue. And then because I had waited too long, having to interact with the emergency veterinary medicine world, which is a system that's built to deal with emergency medical
Yeah.
situations, not with end of life care, which is not an emergency. So I think a lot of people find themselves in that situation where they're at the bottom of a queue at an emergency vet because because today is the last day, but I'm also not a priority for this system. So having to kind of sit in the car for 4 hours in the middle of COVID, knowing that that I wasn't going to come home with him that day was awful.
No.
Sorry.
Oh, no, no, no. I mean, this is,
Yeah.
we've had our conversations about the
I think,
reality
yeah,
of
there's
why
a
we're
lot of,
having this conversation.
yeah,
You know?
there's a lot of similarities, I think, between you and I. Yeah, having experiencing the loss of a person and then pretty immediately experiencing the loss of an animal and
Well, and,
being,
and and I don't know if I shared this with you before, but I mean, you know about Dublin, my
Mhm.
guy that I lost that was the catalyst for all this, but I might not have shared this with you before. Prior to that, I'd had another cat, and it was like a Friday or something. He stopped eating, he stopped doing everything. And
Mhm.
I was like, okay, I'll just go to the vet on Monday. And then, later that night, there was just nothing going. I was like, there's no way I can wait till Monday. I
Mhm.
can't. So I went to an emergency vet care. And well, let me preface this by saying that I have respect for all doctors in any field, human or animal. I never would assume that a medical professional is doing anything besides what they think is the best for a patient at that moment, given all circumstances. Let me preface that. So, however, um, my cat, and his name was a really, uh, really creative name. His name was Kitty. Um, they, I took him in. They came out and they said, "Well, he passed. Would you like us to try to resuscitate?" And I'm in a pan. You're in emotion. I'm like, "Well, of course." I mean, um, and then that resuscitation attempt was $700. And then I had asked them, well, if you were successful with that, what would have happened? What does that even look like? And they said, well, he probably would have had some severe brain damage, and he probably wouldn't have, been around for much longer. And I just remember being so angry I'm like, why would you even offer that to me? You know? Um, so that was my only experience with an ER situation. And I understand that they're set up for emergencies. They're not set up for any kind of, you know,
these are all, that's awful. And that's another just really stark example of how, you know, we have systems in place for a reason. There's an emergency medical system for humans, for animals, and they exist for a reason. And then there's this separate system that exists, and that's end of life care. And they so frequently overlap. They overlap in organ and tissue donation almost 1 to 1, you know, almost every time. And oftentimes in veterinary medicine too, they overlap. So the fact that there's not a really concrete way that these two worlds interface with each other is it ends to these outcomes. It ends up with, you know, having outcomes like this, that why are we attempting resuscitation on a cat who's, we're here for like hospice type, we should be having a
Yeah,
hospice conversation,
right.
you know.
If that's even an option at this moment,
Even, yeah, if it's an option at this moment, if that's an option at all. Veterinary hospice is like such a super tiny subspecialty. It opens the door to a conversation about, you know, how this death phobia, I think culturally we're so death phobic, we don't want to talk about it. It means we've never thought about, if we had had a conversation before about like, oh, are we here for end of life care? That means that things like resuscitation are probably off the table. This is why. And you would already know what the answer to that is. Anybody would already know what the answer to that is, but we haven't thought about it. We haven't talked about it. So
Well, I think
that's,
also,
yeah.
in my experience with my clients and with a lot of the vets that I talk to, some of them, I can't say all of them, but, just because of the advances of modern medicine does not by any stretch, especially when it comes to our pets, mean that it's inherently a good thing to try to save and extend life at every moment. I was talking to a client the other day, in fact, and he was saying, he was just so guilty on if he made, and I get this all the time, if the timing was right, because
Mhm.
his dog had basically stopped moving, eating, all of that. And the vet had said, well, we could do some, because he was tumor ridden. We could do some chemo. We could get him on some pain meds, which could extend his life for, a couple more months. And he was just so distraught, was like, but I made the decision to put him down. I said, well, it's just my opinion. I think you did the right thing because just quality of life. And, it's such a difficult thing, especially when we're talking, um, about our pets when we are the ultimate caregiver. um all of that, the timing of when and how that rests so heavily on our heart that some it's not necessarily our place to get in the middle of nature. If the time is coming to an end, the animal's quality of life is so diminished, then even if there is a medical, I mean, putting I don't think I could ever have the heart put one of my pets on chemo. It's
Mhm.
just, I mean, I don't know enough about, the science behind it. Maybe it is a good if it's caught early, but just maybe it's because my mom passed of cancer. But the time that you have together, the value of that love and how you can honor that and carry it through your life. We're all going to have um, you know, the difficult experience of when and how to say goodbye. And yeah, in the industry in general, the lack of, well, systems, for lack of a better, on how we relate to that is lacking. And, I know it's important for you and I to try to make a difference in that regard. Um, so yeah. Um, okay. Well, do you have any questions for me or what do
I
you
feel like we've
think?
talked so much. I feel like you've answered so many of my questions already, but in the space of this interview. I think that the work that you've done in the program that you've put together is really beautiful because it educates. You've done so much research, and we've talked about this before too. Can you guys tell that we've talked before?
Yeah.
uh, you know, putting names to things, putting things like euthanasia guilt.
Yeah.
I had never 10 years working, organ and tissue donation, and I'm several years deep into the crematory business here now too, and I had never heard that term before. And it just so concisely kind of captures this nebulous, like awful feeling that I feel that everybody has felt. Anybody that's ever had to, sign the paper to say goodbye, has experienced that. And um, so that's one of, yeah, and there's a couple of other actual like terms that you found, scientific terms that like very precisely
Yeah.
kind of encapsulate and enable us to have these conversations. And I think,
Yeah, thank you.
yeah, education and communication, and then building systems to support kind of a more informed uh, way of doing things. I think we've gotten to a place in society, not just with medicine and not just in veterinary medicine, not just in the funeral industry, where we go for efficiency, 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 and efficiency is like, what is it? Economies of scale. We're
Yeah.
just trying to, how do we do this? And I think there's a couple of areas where I think it's time to backpedal a little bit. And so, it's probably not super efficient for me to, say every client, like, I'll come to your house, I'll come to your house twice, I'll come to your house 3 times. Like, that's not a
No,
super efficient way to operate a business, but
but
tweaking all of those little things to make this an experience that is gonna be sad and it's gonna be awful, like every single time. But like, let's try to
well,
find some
yeah,
moments
I
of
mean,
beauty and joy in
and
there.
I
Like,
think,
let's try to do that.
as we've, no, sorry to interrupt.
No.
Uh, as we've discussed, yeah, anything that we can do from the heart, uh,
Hmm.
in the process is critical. And thank you for pointing out, I mean, in my journey with what I've created, granted the emotional element and spiritual element, all of that is critical, psychological. But I also, yeah, I needed names for things. I needed to be able to intellectually put the pieces together that matched with where I was in the emotional process. I mean, as we've discussed, if my program is a guide for healing, and it's kind of, a step-by-step process. I always
Mhm.
advocate, therapy if someone has much deeper trauma issues, but it was important to me to, yeah, be able to establish a language. I needed the verbiage. I needed to be able to know what I'm talking about, how to identify things, how to recognize the challenges and obstacles specifically, so that my brain could get in line with my heart. Okay, Rachel, I just want to finish up by saying thank you so much for your time, and for, you know, everything you've shared with us about your personal experience, about your knowledge with water cremation. And if it's okay with you, for anybody watching this video, is it okay if I put up all your information, no matter if someone's not in Anchorage, Alaska? If they are, definitely go see Rachel. But if not, are you open to answering any questions that people may have?
Of course, absolutely, at any time.
Okay, cool. Well, then I will make sure all of your contact information is available for anyone to reach out to you. And I suggest if anybody has any questions whatsoever about what to do if that time is coming near, reach out to Rachel. She's amazing. She's a wealth of information, and the sincerity and the compassion and authenticity with which she brings to this and to her clients is remarkable. So, Rachel, thank you so much for your time. And hopefully we'll have some more of this in the future. Um,
Thank you. Thank you, Patrick. I
all
think we're
right. Well,
doing, yeah, important work to change the landscape.
okay. Thank
Yeah.
you. Thanks for everybody for watching. If you have any questions or comments, please drop them below. And reach out to me or Rachel to help with any part of your process. We're here for you. So, okay. Thank you.